I think the air conditioner is going to dictate how fast I go because it keeps turning my pages, but that's all right. It's all right. This morning, as I said before, we're talking about living fearlessly, and that is a lot easier said than done. You know, Jesus once said to his disciples, "O you of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Now, what are you afraid of? You know, they did a poll not too long ago, nationwide, and asked people what the top 10 fears were. Think about what your fear is, and then think about what you think might have made the top 10 list. And number 10, we have the dentist. Anybody share that? Number 10, thank you. Me too. All you have to do is have one bad dental experience from the Little Shop of Horrors, and you're good to go. That's a musical reference. Anyway, number 9, dogs. Anybody afraid of dogs? I was bitten as a child, but still not afraid. My dad bought me one. He thought that would help. Number 8, flying. Anybody afraid of flying? Yeah? Yes. I'm afraid of falling, not flying. But anyway, number 7, thunder and lightning. That's a big one. That's a big one. Florida is the lightning capital of the world, and then they have all these men on open green pastures with metal rods in their hand called golf clubs. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, number 6, the dark. I have a light on. Do you have a light on? I do too. I have to see where I'm really afraid of falling, getting up in the night, so I have the light. I like a little bit of light. Number 5. Heights, there I am. Number 5, heights. Yeah, there we go. It's getting bigger. Number 4, needles and doctors. Yeah, I love the artwork of tattoos, but you will never see me with one because I'm afraid of needles. And, you know, I admire them, but I'm too chicken. Can't do it. Number 3, scary, closed-in spaces. How many of you are a little claustrophobic? Thank you. Never gone to the bathroom on a plane before? Never have. I still never have. No, maybe I've gone in my seat, but never in the bathroom. I'm just telling you. Number 2, snakes, mice, rats, bugs, all of the above. Okay. Now, I can do all of the others on the end, but the snakes, can't do it. I'm not afraid to kill them, though. That's what weed eaters are for. Yeah. And number 1, what is the number 1 fear? What I'm doing right now. I don't understand that, but I understand that's petrifying to some people to think that they would have to stand in front of a group of people. Let me introduce you to my family if you don't know them. These are my children. There's Melinda. Melinda was playing the bass this morning. And there's Jordan, and that's Julia. There's Jordan in the middle who insisted on his shower this morning and still has not gotten one. And you see he's not here. He's not going to leave the house without his shower. And that's Julia, that's our youngest. You know, I've been in ministry for years and still people didn't know who my family was because they never see me with them. And this is, there we go. There's me and my wife, that's Vicky, and her hair was shorter then. That was taken a while ago. But they are priceless to me, and I think some of the biggest fears I have come from them. Not that they caused me to be afraid, but because of the relationship you have with family members, it can cause a great deal of fear and anxiety when it comes to protecting them. Back in 1985, within a 24-hour period on Memorial Day weekend, our family's life changed forever. Our healthy, normal, 11-month-old son, Jordan, looked as though he was having a stomach virus. He had those reactions. We called his doctor. The doctor said, just make sure he gets enough water, make sure you keep his fever down. So we did. Over the next few hours, though, the fever kept climbing and climbing to the point where the thermometer no longer registered it. So we were taking him, when he became in a listless state, to the emergency room. As I was putting him in the car, he stiffened up and had a massive stroke. Jordan didn't have a 24-hour virus. He had spinal meningitis. And that's what caused his brain to completely erase. In fact, he was brain dead for a couple of days. They had talked to us and met with us about arranging for a nursing home because they thought he would be in a vegetative state the rest of his life. Well, let me just tell you, those of you who know Jordan, he's the loudest vegetable I've ever seen in my life. He has no problem telling you what he needs. He does everything for himself, except for tying shoes. He doesn't do that very well. But fine motor skills are not number one. But during that time, we learned a lot of things. One thing I learned was when the nurses and doctors let you come and go in the ICU freely, that's not a good sign. When the nurses no longer look you in the eye when you come in the ICU, that's not a good sign. When doctors sheepishly come to talk to you rather than come to you excitedly, it's not a good sign. But you know, even though the doctor, the neurologist recommended that we get a nursing home bed ready, Vicki was very calm through all this. I was a nervous wreck, but Vicki was very calm, and she said, I appreciate the liability that you have to tell me that he needs a nursing home bed, but let me tell you, he said, I'm going to show you what God can do, and I'm going to bring him back to you. And yes, I'll tell you what, I wish I had that kind of courage. At the time, I thought this poor woman is in denial and she's crazy. But she's the one who had the courage. I did not. 10 years ago, in February, our family faced the dreaded C word that many of you have faced as well, from Vicki's doctor. She was diagnosed with breast cancer with a fast-growing lump in her breast, and the initial diagnosis was dismissed as nothing. But as it progressively got larger over a week's time, Vicki knew it was something, and she was right. Always go for a second opinion, ladies, let me just tell you. The doctor confirmed the diagnosis. They did the biopsy immediately. And all Vicki said when she found out she had cancer was she said, you know what? I have children to raise. I have things to do. Whatever you need to do, just do it, and let's get this over with. She didn't want cancer to define her. She wanted to get through it. It's just a bump in the road. It's nothing. Now, I know I didn't feel that way, but all during the 3 or 4 surgeries that she had, the 4 chemotherapy treatments, and the 31 radiation treatments that she had, not one time did she doubt God's complete healing power. And not one time did she ever complain. I wish I could have said the same. I wish I could have used some of that courage that she had. I didn't. I was supposed to be the strong one. Trust me, I wasn't. Perhaps today you could use some of that same courage. Perhaps there are things that are going on in your life and you don't know how you're going to take another step. You may not have been confronted with a meningitis or a cancer diagnosis, but you may be down to your last paycheck or your last solution or trying to figure out the answer to something at your work. Each sunrise seems to bring fresh reasons for fear. But you know, fear is interesting. It seems to have taken a 100-year lease on the building next door, and it's set up shop. Because fear is oversized, and it's rude, and it's unwilling to share the heart with happiness. If you are fearful, you cannot be happy. So therefore, fear is a bully. Did you ever see the two together? Fear is a big bully in the high school hallway. He is brash, he is loud, he is unproductive. And for all the noise that fear makes, it really does very little good. Nothing productive comes from fear. Fear never wrote a symphony, never wrote a poem, never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. And fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith in God did that. But fear itself? Fear herds us into a prison of unlocked doors. Wouldn't it be great to simply walk out of that prison? To be free of fear in your life? Imagine your life wholly untouched by fear. That you would get up this morning and there's not one thing you would be afraid of. You're not afraid for your children's safety. You're not afraid for your own health. You're not afraid that your money will outlast your life. You're not afraid that your job will be cut off and where will you get your next paycheck. You're not afraid of those things. Can you imagine a life like that? This is the possibility behind Jesus' initial question here. Why are you so afraid? If you would look with me at Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 through 27. And I'm going to ask you to do something. I was in a church service not too long ago, and I thought it was very impactful to me. They asked the audience to stand for the reading of God's Word. Would you do that today as we read the Word? Would you stand for His reading? Matthew 8, verses 23 through 27. Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. And suddenly a furious storm came upon the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." And he replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." May God bless the reading of His Word. Would you have a seat? Why are you so afraid, Jesus asks. And at first glance we wonder, is Jesus actually serious? By the way, on the Sea of Galilee, these storms are quite common. They come up without any notice at all, and it will be a sea of glass, and in no time a storm will come in, and it will be huge. So they wonder if Jesus was actually kidding when he asked the question. So they turned here, and this is how one of the disciples actually remembered the trip. He says, "Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat." Now these are Matthew's words. Remember that Matthew was a tax collector, okay? He remembered well the pouncing sea and the bouncing boat, and carefully chose his terminology. Not just any noun would do. He took his Greek thesaurus off the shelf, and he hunted for just the right descriptor that exploded like the waves across the bow. He came across this word that we still use today. It's the Greek word seismos. Now, seismos means a quake, a trembling eruption of sea and sky. A great seismos arose on the lake. Now, that term still occupies a place in our vernacular today. A seismologist studies earthquakes. A seismograph measures them. And Matthew, along with the recent recruits, felt a seismos that shook them to the core. Now, it's interesting about this word. It's only used 2 other times in the Bible besides this one. One was at Jesus' death on Calvary, when the Calvary and the mount itself shook. That was a seismos. And then another time was at Jesus' resurrection, when the graveyard tremored and the stone rolled away from the tomb. That again, the word seismos was used. Apparently, the stilled storm shares equal billing with the cross and with the tomb as how impactful this storm was. Now, how many of you were here and lived through Hurricane Irma? Okay. We were in our apartment then. We hadn't moved to our house, and our apartment was on the corner. And I was convinced when I woke up that morning that there would not be one shingle left on that roof, that there would not be 1 ounce of siding on that apartment building. Did I say we were on the 3rd floor? We're on the 3rd floor. The wind howled around, and our master bedroom sat at the corner of the apartment, so there were windows on both sides, and that wind just whipped around the building all night. And every time I thought it was going to settle down, it didn't. It got worse. And the girls were home with us at that time, and Julia decided that the hallway, we had a little T-shaped hallway from the master bedroom to Jordan's bedroom, and she determined that that was the safest place in the apartment. So she took a small mattress, a blow-up mattress, and put it in the hallway. I couldn't get out of the master bedroom because she had put her mattress there. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, she springs up and announces very, very vividly to the entire family, "We're all going to die." We didn't disbelieve her at that point. I mean, the sounds were terrible. We were convinced the windows were going to blow out. We were convinced it was the worst storm we had ever been a part of. And we lived in Florida most of our life. But we realize that at this point, fear can be sudden. Fear can sneak up on you all at once. We know that fear is sudden because the storm was. An older translation from the New King James Version reads this, "And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea." Not all storms come up suddenly. If you have ever lived in the prairie states, you can see the formation of the thunderclouds a long way off before the storm actually comes to you. But this storm sprang like a lion out of the grass. And in 1 minute, the disciples were playing cards, and the next minute, they were holding on for dear life. And I think it's interesting that this story is from a landlubber's perspective. While the other ones were trying to keep the mass down, Matthew was trying to keep his breakfast down. I mean, he was not one who liked the sea. The other ones were apparently used to it. But the interesting thing is, fear can come up on you suddenly, so therefore it'll surprise you. Jesus got into the boat, and his followers went with him, and suddenly, well, we're Christians, so shouldn't a beautiful rainbow have appeared with doves in the sky and all wonderful things since we're Christians and we followed Christ? But that's not the case here. These men followed Christ into the boat and went into a huge storm. Getting on board with Christ can mean getting soaked with Christ. Disciples can expect rough seas and stout winds. In this world, you will, not might, not may, not could, but you will have trouble or tribulation, as John 16:33 says. Christ's followers contract cancer. They bury children. They battle addiction. And as a result, they face their fears. You see, it's not the absence of the storm that sets us apart as Christians. It's whom we discover in the storm, which is an unstirred Christ. Now, suddenly a furious storm came upon the lake so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. Now, here's the scene. You have the storm raging, and Jesus is sleeping. So the disciples are screaming, and Jesus is dreaming. And we find out in the passage that this was not just, I'll grab a quick nap. This was an intentional slumber. Jesus meant to sleep. He meant to be away from the situation. He was testing the disciples, actually, and he decided that it was siesta time, and he grabbed a leather ballast that they used on boats like this, and he used that for a pillow, and he decided to take a nap. But Matthew and Mark record their response, 3 staccato Greek commands here. And basically in English they are, Lord, save, dying. Those are the 3 Greek words that they say to Jesus when they try to wake him up. Has anyone in your family ever slept through something and it really made you mad? The baby's crying and you're sleeping through this? You know, I am up and I am dealing with this crisis and you're sleeping. You become very angry and frustrated at the one who can sleep through those things. I can't, but someone else can. And you get angry with them. So the question is, basically in Mark 4:39, they say this, Teacher, do you not care if we drown? Interesting. They do not ask about Jesus' strength. Jesus, can you still the storm? They don't ask about Jesus' knowledge. Are you aware of the storm? Or his know-how. Jesus, do you have any experience with storms? But rather, they doubt his character. Do you not care? Interesting. Fear does this because fear corrodes our confidence in God's goodness. God is good all the time. And yet, when we're afraid, we think God is ignoring us. We begin to wonder if love lives in heaven. If God can sleep in my storms, if his eyes stay shut while mine grow wide. If he permits storms after I get in his boat, does he even care about me? Because fear unleashes a swarm of doubt and anger, and it turns us into control freaks. Do something about the storm is the implicit demand of the disciples. Fear at its center is a perceived loss of control. And when life spins wildly, we grab for a component of life that we can manage, like our diet, or the tidiness of our house, or the armrest on a plane, or maybe in some cases, we lash out at people. Because when we can't control things in our life, we tend to find the things we can control. How many of you have ever gotten mad, and because you couldn't control being mad, you decided to clean the house? Thank you. I'm that way. I clean really good when I'm angry. Get me mad and I'll come to your house and clean. I can really do a good job of it because I'm mad. And boy, I take it out on that dirt because that's the only thing I control at the time. And why do we do that? Why do we lash out at each other when we're fearful? Is it because we're bad people? Partially. But it's really because we feel cornered and we feel at a loss of control. Because fear also deadens our memory or our recall. The disciples had a reason to trust Jesus, but by now they had seen him heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. They had witnessed him heal a leper with the touch of and a servant with a command. Peter saw his sick mother-in-law recover, and they all saw demons scatter like bats out of a cave. He cast out spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. Shouldn't someone at least mention Jesus' track record or his resume at this time? Do they remember the accomplishments of the Christ that they knew? They may not, because fear creates some sort of spiritual amnesia for us. It causes us to forget what Jesus has done and how good God actually is. Fear also feels very dreadful because it sucks the life out of your soul. When fear shapes our lives, safety becomes our God. When safety becomes our God, we worship at a risk-free life. Now, can the safety lover do anything great or accomplish noble deeds for God or for anyone? No. Because if you are fear-filled, you cannot possibly trust and love deeply. If you are fear-filled, you will not take the risk to step out on faith. If you are fear-filled, you cannot dream wildly because you're afraid of the consequences. What if their dreams sputter? What if it falls from the sky? The worship of safety emasculates the greatness of God. No wonder Jesus wages such a war against fear. His most common command emerges from the fear not genre. The Gospels list 125 Christ-issued commands that we are not to be fearful. Now, he does it in a variety of different ways, but there are 125. Of these, 21 urge us to not be afraid or not fear or to have courage, take heart, or be of good cheer. And if quantity is an indicator, Jesus takes our fears very seriously. The one statement he said more than any other is this. Now, this is a lot of meat right here, so get this. Do not be afraid. Over and over. That was his command. It was not a suggestion. It was not a nurturing comment. It was a command. Do not be afraid. Because when we're afraid, we take the power away from God. We put it upon ourselves. And that's not going to help. Christ is always calling us to courage. Now, Jesus doesn't want us to live in a state of fear, and you don't either. You have never heard statements like this. My phobias have certainly put a spring in my step. I'd certainly be a rotten parent without my hypochondria. And thank God for my pessimism. I'm such a better person since I lost all hope. Those are not things you hear very often. Because fear does not produce a productive life. We've learned the high cost of fear. The question of Jesus is a great one. He lifts his head from the pillow, steps out from the stern of the storm, and he says, "Why are you fearful, O ye of little faith?" Now, to be clear, fear does serve a healthy function. It is the canary in the coal mine. It is the warning of a potential danger. It's a dose of fright that can keep a child from running out into the street. It can keep an adult from doing things over and over in their life that could cause them to die. It could be too much alcohol or too much tobacco or too many sweets when you become a diabetic. Fear is the appropriate reaction to a burning building or a growling dog. Fear itself is not sin, but fear can lead to sin. If we treat fear with angry outbursts or drinking binges or sullen withdrawals or self-starvation, we exclude God from the solution and we exacerbate the problem. You see, we subject ourselves to a position of fear, allowing anxiety to dominate and to define our lives. Hysteria is not from God. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, as 2 Timothy 1:7 says. Fear will always knock on your door. It will always tempt you. But just don't invite fear in for dinner, and don't allow him to live rent-free up in your head. The next phrase fascinates me. It says, "What kind of man is this?" You see, the promise of Christ is simple. Fear may fill your world, but it doesn't have to fill your heart. You can fear less tomorrow than you do today because of Christ. What kind of man is this? You know, God views our seismos storms like this. Jesus got up and gave a command to the wind and the waves, and it became completely calm. He handled the great quaking with great calming. The sea became still as a frozen lake, and the disciples were left wondering, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. What kind of man is this indeed? It's the same man that we can pray to today. It's the same man who saved us from our sins. It's the same man who claims us as his child and we as his Savior. It's the same man who silenced the waves with one word, who turned a typhoon into a nap time. And Jesus equipped a hurting mother with sufficient courage to face an uncertain life as a full-time caregiver and as a cancer survivor. Jesus can equip you with the bravery and the courage that you never thought you had. This is the courage that Jesus gives us to face today completely fearless. Would you pray with me?